So I would like to call the meeting to order. And our first agenda item is comments from the public on items not on the agenda. Seeing no members of the public here, we'll move along to the consent agenda. I believe we can pull approval of professional appointments because there are none. Does anyone want to pull anything else from the consent agenda? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda consisting of the school board meeting minutes of September 3rd, the school board retreat meeting minutes of September 6th, the approval of warrants, and the authorization for the signing of the MOU with the Essex Police on the assignment of the school resource officer for the FY20 school year. Thank you, Kim. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. Thank you. Yeah?
In the future, will we get at least copies of the warrants included in the packet so that we know what we're approving?
So the clerk signs the warrants.
I
The
understand.
warrants are, it's
Sometimes they're
volumes
like this.
of material, so
I'd like to.
we never have. I think you could ask to look at them when you get here. I don't know what
Is that the
else to
folder?
say.
Just physically, that's the folder that
That's the
Patrick
folder.
signs,
Today.
right? Yeah, right.
So I understand
remember
it's
from before.
technically the clerk can sign on behalf of the board, but the board still has to approve them, right?
Right.
So I would just feel much better having them. So if I wanted to review them, I could. Doesn't mean everyone has to look at them, but.
So I think what I'm struggling with is just the time it's going to take.
I mean, I think we want to honor that and go through it and see what it takes. I mean, we do have approval via the reorganization to make payments prior to the warrants being signed. So that way we're able to take discounts and kind of
understood.
move. So it is a process that I think, we have time to have some additional viewing of it, and then it may be that sense that, after a few months, it might be that sense of like, I've satisfied all the curiosity I possibly can have around these, or you can also catch things and help us improve systems. So I would say, we can execute them and then have anyone that wants to view them.
Are they electronic or is it a physical thing?
They really aren't electronic because our auditor wants to see that physical signature on each one of them. But I can also go back and we could start to look at, maybe there's a printout so you could see vendor, amount, date, and that kind of stuff, a little less than what Patrick has in this folder right now. So I think we can use the time, either in this meeting or even sort of have them come, reviewed, and then the next meeting signed.
All right, why don't
Look at the
you
process.
think about,
I don't
I
want somebody
mean,
to spend the
most
time
of
to
us
download to the
have
computer.
done it a number of times, done it in the past, so we probably feel pretty comfortable. But let's think out about a process that would fill Todd's need. Okay,
Thanks.
great,
Diane?
yeah.
To add on to Todd's remarks, the village and the town both run a list, and it can be anywhere from 5 pages to 6 pages per meeting. They've been doing it for as long as I can remember. And the detail is not as what Patrick is signing for us, but it's name, amount, some rationale, as to what the expense was for.
It's usually about 30 or 40 pages, actually.
Oh, okay, all right.
Just like the check register.
It's like a check register, yeah. So it's, I mean, the examples are there, they're online when they get their packet. It,
Okay.
I was accustomed occasionally to popping into the central office and taking a look at some files just to see who the vendors were, just to cure my curiosity as to who we were operating with, and see if there was any conflicts. It's part of our responsibilities, you're correct.
Right. But we also, I would argue, through the process of looking at the quarterly reports and so forth, fulfill that promise as well. But Brian will take a look at it and see how to fulfill that need. Okay, let's move on to the board FY20 goal work. So Patrick, Kim, Brian, Beth, and I tried to take the work that we had done at the retreat and write some goal statements. And those were included in your packet. What we're suggesting that we do tonight is to break up into the same groups that we were assigned at the retreat, that we look at the goal statements and see if there's revision that we want to make. And then I'm doing this from memory, so help me out when I forget something. Then spend a little time talking about what the timeline should be for that goal, what resources are going to be needed. We started to do this at the retreat, but also think about how it should be monitored and what the frequency of monitoring should be.
I guess with that monitoring too, to add the pieces of evidence that could be collected.
Right.
So we brought the charts, because on the stickies, there's a lot of evidence that you might want to pull up. So you'll have your chart there too, with the stickies.
So does anyone have questions about what they're doing now? Okay, so I think if we could come back together, let's try a half hour and see how we're doing in a half hour. Does that make sense? Okay, all right.
If you get settled, I'll bring you a chart, your chart, so you don't have to, I don't know if they want to stay around here or what, but I don't have more.
Kim and Todd, you were first.
Document, for some reason I couldn't open it in Google Docs. Did you guys want us to do that or no?
So we put ours in Google Docs and I just shared it with Brian.
Okay.
So he can put it up
I don't know
there.
why I couldn't open it in Google Docs.
Can you do the same thing?
I couldn't open it.
Okay, I don't know why. It kept cycling and not giving me the
I
document.
could not.
I was doing that prior to the meeting. The internet wasn't.
Oh,
It was
we
spinning for me.
copied it and then in notes, we have new language, which would be much easier for people to look at, I think. But we wanted to, one of the questions I had was around accountability framework. It was language that Todd had shared when we did it the first time around. And I was wanting to make sure it was clear what that was. And so we talked through it a bit and came up with a little bit different language that I think was sort of capturing what we were thinking. So the board will adopt and implement a governance model that will define roles and responsibilities, set clear expectations for accountability and evaluation of progress towards vision by identifying what will be monitored and when, to clearly establish board and administrative authority. And then, we're not sure if this belongs in a goal or not, but the governance model should be sustainable and support board development. We weren't sure if that's like a resource thing, or like, we weren't sure if that is part of that language of clarifying what we want it to do. Is it shared now, Brian? Do you want me to cut and paste the language? I don't know if I'm...
Couldn't
Anyway, I know that's hard to absorb
The
in
internet.
verbal, but
The internet is acting really strange.
shoot, anything we've got.
Even Brian's having trouble. He had to reload it.
If you go in and access it through the website, it's in the 917 materials as a doc.
917 materials as a doc, not a PDF. Okay. The website, let me look
So,
at it.
Kim, I think we're going to actually approve the goals at our next meeting.
Okay.
But, so maybe if you just talked about what you changed and why, that would be helpful.
No, you go ahead.
We just tried to explain what we meant, or we thought people may have meant, or we were interpreting the accountability framework to mean.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
To me, your rephrasing makes sense. Andre and I were struggling with the kind of hodgepodge of our goal, and thought that strategizing for the future was not something that should be restricted to the continuous improvement plan, but might make friends nicely with your goal.
Yeah.
So if there's any way that you wanted to add
Future.
strategizing for the future into your goal, we'd be happy to let you have it.
I'm just trying to get to, is it in the agenda, Brian? Is it a click in the agenda?
It's
It's
so
in the
meeting
board
materials for 917,
intranet.
Under EWSD School Board All, would also be through the school board's internal.
EWSD School Board webpage, still not.
I think for the school board webpage, I think we can
I'm just going to share drive. I don't ever see
school board.
You have bookmarked it. That's probably.
The superintendent report?
Okay, sorry.
Oh.
Alright.
I could do that for you.
This is not gonna be.
They're just looking for one.
Alright, there we go. Meeting
We're
materials,
not gonna be
sorry.
able to edit this because it's-
Any other, let me see if we,
See everything.
oh my gosh.
Should we move to goal two?
Yeah, and I will
come
dump it
back to
in there,
you and-
like, as soon as I
Okay.
can get it.
Were we,
I'll-
were we
I'll do it.
supposed to be determining how these things would be monitored and what?
Yeah.
So is there just
but
like a-
she's struggling just.
Well, we didn't, so, one of the things that, hopefully, we said the timeline was like a November recommendation, but it's hard to know what the timeline for full implementation would be until we know what the recommendation is. So, the resources are gonna depend on what the recommendation is. So, I think we had originally had a timeline that looked like implementation by the end of the year or the beginning of next year, depending on what model would be chosen. And the resources would be some sort of consultant or support for training. The committee exists. I'm online, but yeah, well, I'm not gonna be able to cut and paste from my notes.
So
That's okay. So, but are there other things that we think, like, I'm not exactly sure how we'll monitor our progress on that, except to see how we do with
Welcome meeting.
a recommendation. Yeah, and then, thanks, Brian. And we thought we found it, but I don't know that I found the document
Kim,
was it there?
can we go to the other goals?
Absolutely,
and
please
come
do.
back to
Yeah.
yours? I think it will be less confusing.
Yep.
So, goal number 2 is the goal about engagement. Brendan and I worked on that. We could not make the goal copy, so unfortunately, you'll have to look at the goal in your material. Maybe you can copy it. Thank you. Okay, Brendan, do you want to talk about what's here? You need to.
Sure, so we basically created a timeline. We identified what some of the main action or activities would be related to this goal. So the first thing we would need to do is to pick a date for our fall engagement, and we would decide that by October 1st. Develop a framework to engage the community about the budget. That would need to be completed in early November. Work with the task team and maybe VFE to develop strategies to engage a broader set of the community. That's late October. We would then have the engagement on November 19th. And then we would also incorporate or consider takeaways from the engagement in the development of the FY21 budget. So that would occur during the budget development season, which is primarily January, February. And then we would deliver our monitoring report to the board in early March, mostly at the conclusion of the final budget development process. So all these dates are sort of subject to change, but this is kind of what we're eyeballing. And then for the spring engagement, would be a topic to be determined. And we would work with the board to identify that theme or topic on March 17th. And we're looking at possibly May 5th as the date for that engagement. And again, at similar steps, we would develop a framework to engage the community around the theme in early April. We would get the word out, and then we would hold the engagement and then deliver a monitoring report toward the end of the calendar year, or the school year rather, by June 2nd. Yes.
We have some gifts for your group too, if you'd like.
Okay.
From number 5. If there were a way to incorporate communicating with the community to support understanding of the CIP goals and progress, or encouraging voter participation and engagement in any of this communication strategy, they might fit better there than in our hopefully disappearing goal.
Well, certainly, yes, I think both of those, I mean, it seems to me that some of the budget, hopefully some of the budget values or things that would come up would be to support the continuous improvement plan. And obviously one of our goals is to try to get more people to the polls, but that's not the only way to engage with the board and with the budget, so. But those could possibly be sort of folded in as part of our goal. Any questions?
Things you think we need to change?
Well, I think you just need, obviously, to be flexible, because there's a lot of engagements work going on right now with the administration already doing, and things that the Voices Group is planning, and So I love this as a guideline, but I think we're going to be working over the next couple of weeks to really pin down. And so just when we come back on the October 1st meeting, there will be more clarity around what Voices will be doing and what that could look like. So just, this, as long as we view this as soft dates and, yeah.
We monitor this simply as like, we do these activities, or are we trying to set goals for community participation? Where we're saying, you know, last year we had 17 people come to an engagement, and this year we want 32 people to come to the engagement, or this year we want people from all schools to be represented in an engagement. Like, do we try, I mean, we have very little control over those numbers, but knowing them might be worth memorializing.
One of the phrases here is what the budget should accomplish. And I have not seen how this engagement is going to get people involved in telling us what they'd like to see done with the budget. The budget, of course, is a reflection of how the program's going to go. So it's,
that would happen under the develop the framework to engage the community. So that's exactly the conversation we would need to have about, like, how will we engage the community? What is the story that we'll tell? What are the questions that we'll need to ask? You know, so that's something that we can't, I don't think we should try to design tonight, but will need to be designed, for sure.
Yeah, and I think, back to Keely's point about that quantitative and qualitative, I think that's a decision for that group too, to really dive into. Are you going to look for the numbers to satisfy, or are you going to look for the depth to which these fewer people get involved in the work and maybe become ambassadors in different ways? So maybe it's not always just the numbers. If you offer a good enough meal and people come and eat a pizza and leave and never engage again, or if you have 10 people who then become like really engaged, maybe you're better off with the 10. So just, I would say that's something for that group to also be thinking about.
So I think that the question is, do you think Brendan and I should try to work on some additional evidence to add to this before the next meeting? Or do you think we can pick the evidence as we create the monitoring report?
I think the latter. I don't think we need more evidence.
Okay. Keely, are you comfortable with that? Okay. Anything else about number 2? Okay. Let's move on to number 3.
Those are old. Yeah, they're in the meeting minutes, in the
So
materials.
we liked the goal as it was written for number 3. We reviewed the sticky notes on our chart, and it changed some of the language to get away from concerns and framed it in a way that focused on the structure and the framework for how we're going to do this as a system, and gives us a sort of tangible goal for this calendar year to really figure out what that framework and that system can look like and how it can function moving forward. So, and that system, again, to elevate student voice. So on September 30th, we'll have our first meeting. This is, sorry, it's pencil, but I'll put it on there and you can all look at that. September 30th, we're going to have a meeting with Beth and with Kim and Tilly and Laura and myself. We're going to start with that meeting and talk about how to, just what that would look like and who needs to be involved in that. And also to work with the Voices group, who is meeting next Monday to talk about some of the same work and how that's going to overlap and where those connections are going to be. Tilly and we identified leaders for this work to take the lead on the framework and figuring out those pieces, what building leaders they need to talk to. And Laura and Tilly are going to take the lead on that work and figuring out that framework with Kim and myself as board advisors. I signed you up, Kim, without asking you, but and Beth as the admin point of contact for the students to review as we move forward and sort of define what that loop is, that feedback loop is going to look like. The resources, the real resources are going to be time from the staff, from the admin and staff. We're going to need some of Beth's time for this work. We're going to also need some administrative staff with data, the Google Forms as surveys come in, as we have all this, who's going to actually process that, and it's going to be some time that will be required, more than dollars for this, for setting up what we hope by May will be a master plan for a feedback loop that the students and the administration and the board have figured out what that will look like. Right now, we don't know, because that's the work of the year to figure that out. To be fully implemented by August of 2020, and that plan would be in place for the start of the next school year to get that feedback loop. The output would be the plan. Monitoring and evaluation would come from the board and from the student reps to see how well that was going, and we could figure out how we would determine that by looking at those responses and how that would work. I think that's it. Anything else, Tilly or Al?
So I think if you could take that up and share it, then we can send out this material
Sure.
for the next board meeting.
Yep.
Okay, great. So let's move on to goal number 4. That's Patrick and Diane.
Yeah. All right, so I feel a little bad about goal 4. We didn't change any of the actual board goal itself as it was written, feeling that it was, broad enough, and the data that we're requesting comes from the vision and based on the CIP. I think, certainly Diane can correct me if she feels otherwise, but I felt that the biggest question that we had to answer with this, which made it difficult to set sort of a time frame, is that I don't think either of us feel that this is the work of 12 people on a board to set the data points that the whole board is looking for, because there are so many. We did hear suggestions from the governance panel about a task team that they have, or a committee that's set up, to specifically outline what is available. So a lot of what we would put in normally for time frame work would be based off of whether or not we decided that was the best route to go. And then at that point, we felt that quarterly was a good sort of feedback time to get that, but so much of that information is data that we want is provided by the state, which only comes, SBACs in August or what have you. So setting up a calendar for that would be, one of the probably goals of a smaller team rather than the full board itself. And then honestly, I think at that point, Diane and I, we went into, what it is we want to see, what questions we might want it to be asked, or what questions, might go to this task team to decide what is most important within this goal to sort of monitor. I mean, I think that would be the recommendation, but again, I think that depends completely on the full will of the board. Answering and monitoring this question is going to be difficult, I think, as a full board itself. So we should decide how we're approaching, all of these disparate data points. There are hundreds of them, without wasting the board's time.
So if we did have an indicators testing that worked with the administration and brought suggestions back to the board, that's one way this work could be approached. Keely.
I like that idea. We had a proposal for kind of a merger or acquisition of your board goal by our board goal. that monitoring and supporting the CIP, like a large part of the work of the CIP, would be revealed through those student outcomes data. We identified a few other types of data that would be relevant, but again, all of this could be the work of an indicators committee. So we figured our goal could eat your goal, and then they could just be one set of monitoring together.
3 words left.
Let's see, the last couple of phrases are probably the key here on number 5.
One of the things I think I lost my thought completely.
I mean, Diane and I were still going strong at the end of our 30 minutes, talking about,
Okay.
and so, I mean, I won't say by any stretch of the imagination do we explore every option of what this goal presents, which is a really good reason not to open it up anymore.
Right.
What's already there.
Well, I do think if we're going to have quarterly reports, some of those reports are going to be CIP related, right? Yeah, they'll have to be. So, yeah, maybe you and Diane want to talk a little more about whether you want to recommend an indicators testing and what you think of the work of that testing should be. And you might want to talk with Beth as you're doing that.
Yeah, I wanted to make, I guess I wasn't clear whether or not just Diane and I, between the two of us, kind of had the authority to.
You can make a recommendation.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Okay, so Keely, where are we at with number 5?
I think we've gotten rid of our entire goal.
Yeah.
By
Okay,
handing off parts to groups 1 and 2 and suggesting merging the initial part with group 4. We did identify some metrics that would be relevant to monitoring the CIP that were not student data. So those could be a friendly amendment to your list of stuff to ask for. Stuff like reporting of PLC outcomes, staff responses to an equity survey, and in the future, reporting out on growth from the teacher evaluation system. That was Beth's suggestion. So things to look at about our whole system beyond student outcomes.
so if you could send those specific ideas to Patrick, I think, and Diane, that would be helpful.
And if people are really eager to have a 5th goal, I'm sure that like somebody who feels that their goal has gotten too big could jettison something back to us. Like if you don't want strategize for the future, we could turn that into a very short goal all of its own. But
Well, they say, so they
Now,
say
on the document, so.
3 to 5 goals is ideal, so if you ended up with 4, I think that would be fine. All right, so can we go back to goal number 1?
the governance work this year. Future strategizing.
Really, I blocked the strategizing feature in there, but, I'm not sure that really grabs it, but I would,
Using semicolons between different activities in your list, like
Okay.
after future,
yeah.
clear expectations for time. Yeah.
I guess there aren't as many things in the list as there used to be.
Yeah, I know.
So.
Do you see any other, I mean, it's,
I mean,
it's just not
and
great
will
language.
now, because there's really only two
Yeah.
things.
So, Kim, I have a question. So should it say clear expectations for accountability and for evaluation of progress toward the vision? Or is it accountability for the vision? I'm not, I'm struggling a little bit with what that's saying. How broad is accountability, I guess, is the question. Or is accountability defined later in the sentence?
Well, I think what we're thinking is that the accountability would come out of clearly establishing the administration's authority and the board's authority, and therefore, what each of us need to do to make sure we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, if that makes sense.
That's written in the last clause of the sentence. So
I think we were thinking about it in the, so what if, whatever language it is, what if we're not in compliance with the expectations? The monitoring should include the plan to get there, and the board understanding sort of if that requires us resourcing it from a budget standpoint, or, but that it's sort of like a closing the loop on which part of it do we help move forward, because we set the expectations, and it's not, we're not in compliance, we fire the superintendent, it's, we don't have 80% of the kids reading by third grade right now, what is our plan to get there? So that sort of share the planning and the process for getting where we're going, kind of. Is that,
I think so.
That
Yeah.
idea of sort of accountability, and then what if we're not doing it? Like, what's either the plan or the recourse or the piece that we own to recognize how budgeting, for instance, will be impacted by how we get to the goals that might have been set? Or is there a different policy, like transportation resulted in a different policy? So what piece of it is ours if we're not in compliance with whatever? And what piece of it is administrative, but how do we hear what it is that's needed to support progress towards the vision?
Maybe I'm the only one who's struggling. I'm just struggling to understand why there is this clause, clear expectations for accountability, and then another clause to clearly establish board and administrative authority.
Okay,
Are they
so
two different things?
Yes, so
Oh, okay.
let's say what the administration's authority is, and if they are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, then what steps, what actions do we have as a board available to us to make sure that the administration does what they're supposed to? I mean, in simple terms. So example, if we went to, say, policy governance, if there was a finding that they were not meeting, I don't know what the terminology is, a specific policy. Okay, so what do we do? What do we have at our disposal to meet that policy?
So that's the clear expectations for accountability.
Yeah, I think this could be wordsmithed some more, but
Okay.
it's one thing to say, okay, you're not doing what you're supposed to, right? Or you're not achieving what you're supposed to. And then it's another to say, well, what can we do about it? What's within our authority to do something about that? And I would say it goes the other way too. If we're not doing what we need to be doing, I think the administration, it should be clear to them what they sort of prod us to do to make sure we're fulfilling our role.
Okay.
We felt it was a little different than just defining roles and responsibilities. But initially, we did sort of poke that idea. Is it possible that it gets captured in roles and responsibilities and accountability and evaluation? But then I think that other piece that Todd's talking about, where okay, what now? That it might be like no matter what model, we sort of govern over policy, we establish policy, govern and monitor policy and progress towards a vision. Like those are any model of governance, that's what we do. What do we do if we're not making progress? And I think that's the piece that Todd was looking to have be, spoken to in some way, either around process in whatever model we choose, or around being clear in our roles and responsibilities. We already say that we'll look at policy if it needs to go deeper by creating more, policy governance, they call it bowls, but another set of criteria that we're willing to say this is the way it's supposed to be. And now that's the other marker we expect to get reported on.
So what would a monitoring report look like? What metrics would this go, what metrics would we look at to say, yes, we accomplished this goal or not? What would be, where would the evidence be?
Well, I think it depends on what we choose for a model. I don't know what that is, but we need to identify those things. And then say, okay, if they're not meeting it, then what can we do? What's within our...
And I'm not sure if I'm getting the question either, Brendan. How do we monitor our progress on this goal? Right. So I think that's, where did I say? Oh, recommendation to the board by November, evaluated through these criteria. So we should choose a model or make a plan on whatever we're going to do regarding governance and have an expectation that process is really clear. Our roles and responsibilities are clear, how we're making progress towards our vision is laid out, and how and when we're going to monitor, and sort of what we expect, let's say, in a monitoring report, that it might, again, I'm just picking policy governance language because I know it would be compliant or partially compliant or whatever those words are, but then it would be, and here's the plan to come into compliance, because the likelihood is you're going to not be compliant for a long time. And I think our role is to ask, what's our process to get there? What's our timeline? What do we anticipate for resources that we might need? So it's not a January conversation about budget, but it's like an anticipation, because we've had some information throughout about what gets us towards whatever we define as what we're looking for in that policy that's being monitored.
That if a goal needs that much explanation, that it's going to be very hard for us. This seems like a goal that is trying to accomplish something that we haven't yet determined. And so to me, it should be, the board will adopt and implement a governance model, period. That should be the goal.
Do we not want to set in our goal, though, the things that people laid out as important around that? Because on that goal, we had all these stickies around what would be important for that.
Right. So it could say, the board will adopt and implement a governance model that accomplishes the following, and then boom, boom,
Yeah.
boom, 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 period. This just seems really
Does that work?
complicated and.
Yeah, well, that's why I said I think it needs to be...
Restructure. I think that's a great idea, because it was hard to make a sentence that made any sense,
that's what we
especially as
had.
we're adding strategizing for the future.
Well, I think
Just
that's what we had
kidding.
originally.
But I think that is exactly actually what we had the first time around,
Oh, okay.
is a bulleted. You want me to read it? Okay. How about we write this? Defines roles and responsibilities, identifies what will be monitored, how and when, identify accountability framework, be sustainable, and support board development. Does that work? Okay, the problem that we had was that we weren't positive what accountability framework. When we unpack that, we could still make that a bullet. Sets clear expectation for accountability and evaluation of progress towards vision.
Yeah.
Or
I
something
mean,
like that.
like number two, we haven't yet developed the framework for engaging the community about the budget, you know? And
Right.
does this budget support, so I think it's okay to not have it all figured out.
Yep,
I think it's, what would be worse, I think, would be to have a goal that is completely unclear or unintelligible.
Yep.
And so we may not know what accountability framework looks like yet, but we'll figure it out as part of our goal.
Okay, so Kim and
I'm gonna
Todd,
make
do
that
you
bullets.
think you have enough to rework
yeah.
this a little bit and share it with the rest of the board?
Yeah, we just didn't need time tonight, apparently. We should have just stuck with.
We
what
should have
had.
stuck with what was there.
Right.
What we were trying to do was clarify what was written in sentence form. So
Okay,
we were good.
so, so one of the, so I think if we could all, get what we've done out to the rest of the board in written form prior to next Wednesday, then it can go in the board notes for our October 1st meeting. And I think if you have feedback on a specific goal, if you think there's stuff missing, if you could share that with me, I can contact the team that's working on it and see if we can get it to a form that's ready for approval at our next board meeting. One of the things we talked about is, since we've been working in these teams, would it make sense for these teams to be the ones who monitor the progress on the goals? I don't know where that leaves Keely and Andre. I guess it means you get pulled into monitoring their goal and our goal, right? Does that make sense? Okay, we'll figure it out. Are people comfortable with being responsible for monitoring the goal they worked on?
My only, if one of my roles is doing the student rep work as that goal, maybe somebody else monitors, so maybe Keely can monitor that team could monitor that piece, because we'll be working.
That's
That
what
makes
you're
closely.
doing the
Yeah.
mentoring work.
Right.
That's a good idea. You comfortable with that?
When will this be reported on? Since, as you know, I'm not planning to run for reelection.
Right.
So I wouldn't want to leave Andre holding the bag.
Well, Al would be there too, because he was
Right.
on that goal.
Right. Okay. I think that works.
It's okay.
Okay. Well, thank you all for your work, and you have some, we all have some responsibilities due next Wednesday. Okay. So, oh dear. I'm having trouble finding the agenda. Thank you, there it is. All right, the next item on the agenda is to ratify the support staff master agreement. I would say the master agreement and the side letters of agreement. Before I entertain a motion, does anyone have any questions? Pat?
I have one question, I'm assuming, Kim, you can answer. There was one specific instance of one specific employee as part of a side letter? I mean, I don't what's unique about that one individual? Yeah, Carol Speranza. It was a side letter that is only referencing her, it looks like, nobody else.
It's because she's still on an insurance plan. That's different from everybody else's, right?
Yeah, I think actually also her and Brian, you might know, you might know, or Beth, I think there may have been a change in the percentage of hours and,
So deals with insurance.
and she'll still remain covered by the plan where otherwise she may not, if I'm recalling.
Okay.
And it's non-precedent setting, but there was I'm not frankly recalling, Beth, the rationale, but it's not a new situation, I don't think.
Right. It's to continue coverage.
Okay. As long as it was just,
Yeah.
it was an oddity that it was
Yeah,
just
no,
one
And this is the
specific individual. I was
last,
just,
this is it for that.
Right. Todd?
Just a comment that I would have appreciated seeing a strike through and underline version, so I knew.
Oh, that was given out.
I have it, was that not in the version
It wasn't
was
in
the package?
this package, it was,
We got it from Deb.
yeah, but it
I
was in
didn't
one of
realize
the
it
other
wasn't the
ones.
one that was.
I will resend it to you.
So just in the future, to
Yeah.
again, know what I'm
It-
voting on, I would
right.
have appreciated that.
Yeah.
We
It
did,
was
yeah.
before one of our,
We talked
executive
about
sessions.
all the changes in executive session. That might have been the night you weren't there, so that would make sense. Okay, any other comments or questions? If not, I'll entertain a motion that we approve the support staff master agreement for FY 20 and the accompanying side letters of agreement.
I'll make the motion.
Okay, any further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. Kim, Beth, and thank you very much for your long and hard, and I know at times challenging work on this, so thank you.
We are fortunate to have strong relationships with our union folks. I appreciate
Yes.
Beth's work to that end, and pieces of this may take longer than we would wish, but I think we are able to maintain a respectful discourse as we go through, and I'm grateful for that. So thank you to our partners across the table and to those putting in long hours, especially Deb.
Yes, we should express
and-
appreciation for Deb as well.
Absolutely. She is an invaluable resource and a trusted resource for both the union folks and for us in understanding the implications, financial and otherwise, of the proposals made on both sides of the table. And it would be impossible to do this well without her on either side. So I'm very grateful.
true.
Thank you, Deb.
Well said. Okay, next are her fourth quarter financial reports. Brian?
So, what I'm gonna do is I'm going to pitch hit a little bit for Kathy Barrett. She wasn't able to join us this evening, but I can make sure that any of your questions get back to her and we can answer them sort of as in between meetings. So what we have to date is in the notes I provided a brief summary, and the summary is basically that the financial performance during FY19, and this is unaudited at this point in time, but the performance was strong for Essex Westford School District, the Center for Technology, Essex, and the two of the three key enterprise accounts the district operates, Child Nutrition Services and CTE Skill Tech. I mentioned in the notes that the rink had an issue in which one of the longtime ice rental clients had left, and that revenue wasn't able to be picked up. They ended up running an operational deficit. that can be covered by available fund balance, and that the FY20 budget is going to give time to recover or to adjust expenses for that. So the fourth quarter reports are strong and they're good news. So what yep.
And just make sure I understood what you just said. The deficit in free fund will be covered by the general fund?
The ring,
fund balance,
the ring.
the ring fund.
Yep.
balance.
It will
That's
impact
what's-
timing of a purchase or a replacement purchase of a Zamboni
Okay.
that we would expect from that, but they'll be able to recover and move forward.
Okay, great.
So what I had provided to the board was, along with detail, was also some summaries. This slide deck is going to be talking about the summaries and moving through the highlights. It's the intention of putting together the slide deck so that it can go onto our website and be part of the financial information that we keep there, curated for the public to review and then answer any questions they have. So we'll be going both back and forth in detail as well as summary, but this report will get updated and moved to the website very shortly. So what I've done is we'll start off with the general fund for EWSD. We'll talk about revenues. I've made a really concentrated effort to begin to move all our financial reporting so that it mirrors our budgeting process, so that we don't end up having sort of multiple languages spoken. So you'll see that as we do in budgeting, we talk about local revenues. In this case, in the general fund, tuition is a large element. We host approximately 70 tuitioning students. Most of them are coming from the Islands community and also Georgia and Fairfax. We had a shortfall. We fell slightly below what our projected revenues were, about 2%. And most of that was just some fluctuation in FTE. We were about 1 FTE shy of what our projections were for revenue. However, revenue year over year continues to grow. So we had a growth of just over $22,000. Interest earning, you may have seen that we far exceeded budget by nearly $250,000 in interest earnings. This is in part from the larger than normal cash on hand balance that we had from the FY18 surplus. You encountered the FY18 surplus while you did the FY20 budgeting, and we ended up putting about $3.8 million of that surplus went in to lower the tax impact. And you also asked the voters for their approval to move about $365,000 over into the capital fund to help with your long-range planning. And then I just noted that building rental income saw a year-over-year growth of about 6%. It was actually building rental, streamlining it, making it easier was one of the promises of merger. We've developed a whole online system that rolled out in FY18, and we're moving towards it, so we're above targets there. It's still, it doesn't represent too much more of a conversation in an $80 million budget, but it is a promise of merger point, so I wanted to bring it up. On state revenue, our general state support grant was less than budgeted, and we had expected that. If you recall, the rescission for healthcare back in FY18, they took 65% of what our rescission amount was going to be, and then they took the remaining in FY18. So it was about $285,000, if I recall. So we knew that was coming and had built in the mechanisms to be able to support our operations because of it. The state aid transportation, those reimbursements exceed what is a very conservative budget. We've had a lot of volatility, therefore we not always able to precisely anticipate what we are going to receive. We ended up receiving approximately 15.5% larger than what the budget was. FY20's budget projections for this revenue are also conservative. We'll continue to watch it. If we start to see a little less volatility in these revenue numbers, we'll start to take some of the risk and move it closer to what our projections are. But right now, transportation reimbursement continues to be, we can't use all our expenses because we continue to budget as if we were attracting all the drivers that we wanted. Expenditure and extraordinary reimbursement, these are all tied out to your detail report. That's why some of them are rather long headings, but so if you do a crosswalk between these explanations and some of the variances, you'll be able to hopefully find them rather fast. These revenues far exceeded the targets, due mostly because they're reimbursable services. So, you know, we project based upon a service plan that actually gets submitted to the state in October. So in a few weeks, we will begin projecting what our special education services are going to be starting next school year. We obviously have things that change between October and then September of 20. So, you know, those change and they're reimbursable. So if we have more students move in, we can anticipate greater revenues than we expected, vice versa. Federal revenues, the IDEA-B, all the title money, 1, 3, 4, and 2A, these are, all the IDEA money is coming in to assist in the special education, preschool, students with disabilities and so forth. All the title money is coming in for interventions, staff development, other things like that. Again, these are all reimbursable, so we project a number, and we have to project that number and submit plans to the state in the winter. And then we wait until September of the fiscal year that begins to be awarded our numbers. So what happens a lot of times is we will see an execution issue between adjusted budget and actual, primarily because we've had 9 months to plan the approved budget, and sometimes we have 6 days to plan the actual budget that gets approved to us. We just got our award for this money last week on Thursday. So it becomes quite a process of chasing it. And then lastly, in other revenue, Medicaid reimbursement revenues books so far exceed the target. It's a number that's up near $500,000 in excess of what the budget target is. Part of this is where we stand with the pre-audit. Some of those will be reclassed to deferred revenue and will be available in subsequent years. So you're able to apply for reimbursement for Medicaid eligible services that we provide to our students. But if you're, depending upon the time period of those reimbursements, you're sometimes receiving the reimbursement in a different fiscal year than the services. So you actually have to bring it up in an accounting method to deferred revenue and then write a new plan for it in subsequent years. And then E-rate revenues, we're pretty conservative in that budget target, and we exceeded it considerably in FY19. And again, that's E-rate is all have to do with, you probably see it, the Universal Service Fund that you see on your various telecommunications. That all goes into a fund, and then the government receives requests for cashback discounts for telecommunication, internet access, and internet connectivity for eligible schools. So we receive that. Paperwork, again, can come in which we are not marrying current expenses to those revenues. So there's some volatility in what the amount's going to be. Generally speaking, how did we do with our approved revenue budget versus our realized revenues? And you can see in each one of these, we're relatively close. There was no major departure from one or the other. And it's always important to put some kind of graph in, so that's what we have. This is the summary. I've covered many of the changes, but I just wanted to call to your attention what we're presenting to the board and trying to move to a consistent basis is we're giving the prior fiscal year. Your detail also included a column discrete for transfers or adjustments to budget. We also will include encumbrances and actuals as we get into years that aren't the final quarter. Then we give the year in which we're currently focused on, and then we give a delta for both dollar delta and percent delta from the total of one year to the next. On expenses, so under expenses, the instructional programs, remember there's 3 different categories for expenses: instructional programs, instructional support, and then admin/other support. Under instructional programs, regular ed, this is one of our largest line items within the entire budget, and this constitutes nearly 80% of all your licensed educators and others that fall into that area, and then we have some other areas like library guidance and others that are part of your collective bargaining agreement. Expenses were approximately 4% less than projected. Most of those are coming from personnel lines. This is a heavy personnel budget line item, and those vary from changes in employee benefits, larger than expected number of new hires not requiring the budgeted. We budgeted for 2 person for every new hire. We don't necessarily realize 2 people for every hire. It varies. And then a variety of other circumstances. This pool right here is hundreds of employees, so there's quite a bit of turnover, attrition, retention, and so forth. Special education was slightly under-executed in the budget, approximately 2%. However, year over year, it's increased by about 4.5%. And you remember that was the number we were looking at the service plan. And again, tremendous volatility on an individual student basis for special ed. Psychological services, the expenses for fiscal year, approximately 114 of remaining budget capacity. This was due to us using or requiring only a fraction of the budget capacity we put to technical services, basically hiring outside psychological services to come in. And again, this is just a difference between an October service plan, anticipating what students we may have come in, what their needs may be, and then realizing it over the course of the actual year of execution. Library services, budget, in large part, personnel savings is just a modest. If you take personnel out, that budget was nearly perfectly executed to its capacity. And then under admin and other support, Office of Principal Services expenses were greater than the budgeted capacity, but it was primarily due to personnel lines and specifically to tuition reimbursement expenses. And this was really associated with the growth model that we have, especially starting at the leadership level and moving it all the way down. There was a lot of principals that have taken the opportunity to train along with their staffs at Solution Tree for PLC training and other district initiatives. Operations and maintenance of plant. The expenses exceeded the budget target by nearly 11.5%. The overage was expected following the reporting issue the district had with the state regarding separately voted capital reserve fund. So this was at the time we submitted the information to the state. Using the state's advice, it turned out that our capital reserve fund was not going to get funded through tax and be separate. These projects continued and they've been absorbed into the operating fund. This is actually the strategy that we've picked up and will practice in FY20, in which we'll stop having a separate fund of necessary work that we need to do on the assets the community's invested in, and instead build it into our general fund. And then finally, student transportation expenses are under budget as expected due to the shortage of drivers. And then another chart. So total expenses of FY18 in the light green, total expenses of FY19 in the darker green. You can see that we've had some increases under the admin and other support. Those constitute, along with all your central office, but also your special ed administration and so forth. And then instructional is pretty flat, and there's a slight tick increase in the instructional programs. So this is actuals to actuals. And that's the summary again, covering most of the deltas in the highlights. And just for a sense of place, what I've done is that you can see that about 61 cents of every dollar is spent on the instructional programs. About 13 cents is spent on the instructional support. So that's making up about 74% of the pie. And then 26 cents is spent on admin and other support. This is also where all our debt service is and all our facilities. So this slice of the pie is not necessarily overhead. A lot of it enables us to be ready to learn. Computers are on, light bills are paid, people are receiving paychecks into their banks. which really helps this part happen.
For students.
Yes, for students. Any questions on the EWSD fund? Yes, Al? Yep. Yep, save that for the last, it's the dessert. Okay, for CTE, so same concept, some highlights, looking at revenues. Their revenues are a little less complex, so we're just looking at all their revenues. Adult tuition revenue, again, is below budget targets for FY19. What we're seeing is a change in circumstances for adult students to be able to get financial aid, and we've also seen a marked increase in area competition for these types of students. Vermont Tech and some others have really gone pretty aggressively at them. And VSAC funding has kind of dried up for them. So it's making it difficult to reach our targets. We've adjusted the revenue quite a bit for FY20 and have some strategies to try to do some recruitment. But we've been carrying a budget of about 81.6 for the last 2 years. We haven't realized it. We've adjusted that revenue projection down to about 55 for next year. And then vocational tuition, students, and state support grant. If you look at these combined opposed to difference, because it's a delta, we're short on the first, heavy on the second. But if you combine them, we're basically just slightly below target. And it was a minor difference with the AOE and the 6th semester average. As you know, there's multiple iterations of equalized pupil, and that also flows to the 6th semester average. That is a very small summary of the revenue, and you've had all the detail as well as a larger summary than that. Under expenses, vocational ed expenses, this is sort of their direct instruction or regular instruction line. Their expenses are below target by about 3.8. Key drivers were benefit savings, some lower rental and lease costs, and some supply expenses. Depending upon where we are with purchase versus lease of some of their high-end equipment, those lease costs change, equipment prices go up, but equipment sometimes can be eligible for grant funding. So it changes some of our expense profile. Office of the Area Vocational Director, this is sort of the equivalent of the principal's office. Expenses ended the fiscal year about 3.25 above target. Key drivers, again, personnel lines, particularly overtime and tuition reimbursement, but also some unanticipated cash in lieu payments. So a variety of things. Again, their budget is about 10% of our overall budget, in comparison. So a smaller, a singular change in a health plan can have a much more dramatic impact than in a budget that has 50+ million in benefit costs, personnel and benefit costs. And then operation and maintenance expenses were well below target for the year, as projects identified during the budgeting process were adjusted or deferred to subsequent years to better accommodate instruction. This is one of those things that if we can't get a project done in that 6 weeks of window that we have, then it more likely than not could begin to impact instruction. If we can't get into the colonial room, or this summer we redid all the bathrooms by the colonial room, if we can't do that, we really can't redo the bathrooms once the colonial room starts serving to the public. Just won't work for that clientele and for that instructional needs. So there's some deferred, and the bathroom actually was a large one that was deferred to this summer out of FY19. And then the expenses. Any questions on CTE? Child nutritional services, I'm not going to cover the skill tech or the rank. While they're very important and they play a big role in our operation, they're pretty small as far as numbers, but I know there's interest in child nutrition. So what we have is revenue. Our sale to students revenues was lower than target, primarily due to a realizing of less paid meals than was projected. So in FY19, a total 12,400 less school year meals, breakfasts and lunches were served. And that had more to do with some changes in our model and therefore some access because what we saw was a pretty significant increase in the numbers and also meals served to our free and reduced population. And you can see the federal reimbursement revenues year over year increased just over 8%. The summer food program, this is the summer food program that took place not this summer, but the previous summer. And those revenues were impacted by the loss of Founders Memorial as a free summer meals site, and also less than what we had projected for meals served. I think I've shared with the board, we've rectified that quite a bit and saw that we're realizing some pretty great numbers. 33,000 meals were served at Maple Street this summer. And we have some plans to try to expand that. Yep.
Can you remind me why we lost the Founders site?
It's a calculation of the density of poverty around a specific point. So if it does not meet that geographical boundary, then it doesn't matter if it's a little further out or a little further
So
out.
it's defined by the population around this.
Immediately around that site. And they've calculated over and over again, as does the state, to check your calculations. And right now, Maple Street is the only eligible location that we can serve out of.
But if the students aren't walking to the school, and the population's coming in from farther out than just the immediate walkable area, which is what's happening, why can't the busing population be counted? Because they're not walking to the school when they're getting free and reduced lunch.
In the summer meals it's the density of poverty of the residences around there. So it's not,
So it doesn't matter what
Whether or not
the,
they have kids, presumably.
right, okay.
They're not busing.
now, what we could do is that site becomes eligible because of the density of poverty around Maple Street, but we could serve people from anywhere. So our child nutrition services is in talks with Essex Town, Parks and Rec about, does it make sense? Could we move kids to Maple Street to receive free meals? Are there other people that could visit Maple Street? I mean, right now, if you're under the age of 18, it doesn't matter where you're from, you can have a free meal.
It seems to me that Parks and Rec, EJ, has some transportation around the village, but Parks and Rec really doesn't support outlying areas in the town for busing or for summer program. So the numbers are probably a lot smaller because it's just a rural area, such a large area.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot that happens at Maple Street
Yes,
every summer.
it's the density.
And it's from even multiple towns, it's not even
Yeah.
just our own. So under expenses, food service operations, so, the drop in sales is something that's tracked on a daily, year-to-year basis, on a weekly, on a monthly, by site, by category, by a series of things. So they saw pretty early on that they were seeing a drop in their projected revenues. So there was some accounting changes, and we're kind of going through as we have some new leadership in the child nutrition services and some changes at the state and federal. However, basically at the end of the day, their expenses were constrained considerably to end up this year in FY19 running a surplus. Now, it wasn't as large a surplus as they had budgeted, but at the end of the day, a $40,000 surplus opposed to a six-figure deficit is a great turn, and we see some potential as we move up. Anything else? Great,
Thank you, Brian.
thank you. Thank you, Beth.
Okay. We all good on that? All right. Next up is the superintendent's report.
Okay, so Brian, could you also just get the website up at some point? I don't know if you already do. Okay. So the report, usually this is based on my goals, but because I hadn't written the goals, like I was doing that simultaneously, so I gave you my kind of other report. I have increased my time in schools. I meet with an hour with every principal. We're calling that a one-on-one time, and that's, we talk about instruction, we talk about personnel or scheduling, intervention. We talk about, we have a running, no, we call it a rolling an agenda that we can both add to, and so that now is different. We were trying to fit in walkthroughs and do that, where this year I also scheduled, I feel like in the third year I can do this, and there's more time available to me to be able to get in schools. And it's important that I do that for 90 minutes a month in every school. So I feel like already I'm in schools a lot. And when I'm there, the principals are choosing to go around through schools with, in classrooms with me, and we're already practicing what does feedback look like and really getting a good handle on it. Some have just said, you're on your own, go, and that's awesome too. And staff has been really welcoming, and it's been great, and kids too, so that's exciting. It's also nice to know that a kid knows who I am and that in my role, which is fun. Our focus is on that instructional leadership. We have 12 administrators from the district participating in an instructional leadership academy, very similar to what I did in Washington, D.C. It's beyond that, though. It is tailored to walkthroughs and giving feedback. So what I did, I learned how to work with the principal to do that. This is actually, they're coming here doing walkthroughs with us, and we're in a cohort with other, I think there's 8 districts or SUs in Vermont. And so it's tailored to us. We are partnered with Colchester in that, so we will do walkthroughs. Our 12 administrators, and I don't know how many are in it from Colchester, will do walkthroughs in Colchester and also EWSD. So Amy Miner and I, the superintendent there, are very excited that we're paired together and be able to do that work. So that's great. We have our 12 that are invested in it, are very excited about the work. When I meet with a principal, that's what they keep saying, is they can't wait to get involved in that. And then that one-on-one time that I have with them, plus the 90 minutes, plus our walkthroughs, I really think that we'll be able to focus on that student improvement and really move instruction along, which is pretty exciting. Our professional learning communities, I did update you that Brian and I and other administrators from central office and a couple of principals and an assistant principal are headed to Georgia, Atlanta next week, Atlanta, Georgia, to learn, it's basically supporting cultures of PLCs and what do you need in place. So we feel like that was a good one for district office administrators to go to. So how do we support schools in developing the culture? And when you think about the United States, some of the districts are 75,000 kids, and we have 4,000. So when I go out of state, I think, oh, we're just like a school size. So I think it's really appropriate that we're learning about culture and how to support that. I think that'll be good for in Brian's position also, and when we think about budget and what do we need to do, and operations. So that's exciting. Our leadership team meetings, we've already begun working on working deeply on the professional growth model and what that looks like. It is all online now. Administrators, all principals, supervisors have been trained on how that works. I'm really excited to share it with you. There's Deb has done an amazing job putting it into a system and with help so that when we're in a classroom, when principals have a tablet or whatever, they can enter the data in, what they're seeing, feedback, and it gets emailed directly to the teacher. The teacher can answer questions or give comments, and it goes right back to the principal. So it's closing that feedback loop, which is always left wide open. It's a really hard thing to accomplish. And so that's really exciting. We will put that on the agenda once we have it online and I can show you how it works. And then I would like teachers and principals throughout the year to talk to you about that model and to see what it's like. I've mirrored the instructional leadership model off of the same thing, although it's not online yet. I feel like getting to know what the professional growth one looks like first before we add the principals too. They're getting used to doing that online and what it's cost. But eventually the principals will be all online also. But I've mirrored it off of that with giving feedback and setting goals the same way, setting a team goal. They're very similar in the accountability in them. So we have I did put in the new leadership team meeting schedule, and there's time for PLCs to work together, like grade level PLCs, which will be with me, each of the grade levels, and then the K-5, 6, 8, and then after school, Essex High School and CT administrators will meet. Brian was at our last meeting and is welcome to come anytime, but I think it'll be really productive in sharing. They share a campus. We'll make it a little more formal on their meeting time and when that will happen. So, highlights through EWSD. I put in some things that were happening. So the initiative with laptops at EHS, I heard that it was pretty exciting and very well organized to give everybody their laptop or their Chromebooks. Which is that's exciting that they have that. And the use of that, so if there's not internet service at home, or they're also available here to use. And I know that Al wants to know what or how many families don't have internet service and what could we do about that. I think that would be a great thing to look into, but the apps that they can use, though, here at school, they don't need access to the internet on those Chromebooks at home. So that's really helpful. And they're loaded right in there. So tomorrow night is our safety public forum. You're all invited. We will be looking at the run, hide, fight and explaining that to the community and where we're at in that process. We'll go over some protocols with that. And also, how does SEL, the social emotional learning, help and support school safety? So that's that. We had 3 UVM Teachers of the Year honored, and that there will be a UVM that happens every year. That the celebration is October 9th at UVM, and we had a kindergarten teacher from Westford, a special educator from the high school, and a CTE pre-tech teacher. All very well deserving and exciting. So they were honored as a surprise at our opening in-service, and then we put more out about them as they went. But we had a process to find those teachers. We had a process in place. And then we did Ben was collecting a lot of back-to-school photos. I don't know if you've been on the website to look at them. And some parents submitting their back-to-school photos too, which is very cute that they get involved in sending those in. So that one of the bus, I think I should frame and put in. I'll frame it for Brian and put it in his office. It's what?
My daughter's.
That's a great selfie. Suzanne was very excited with that selfie, and she got off the bus. Any questions or comments? Yes, Brendan.
So just a comment on the Chromebook initiative. I came to the high school with my daughter to pick hers up, and it dawned on me what an amazing, seeing the kids in line to get their Chromebooks was pretty amazing that we're able to offer that as a district. And it seems to me like right on par with the whole equity initiative, you know?
Agree, yeah.
The fact that every high school student can have the same tool, maybe not the same access, but the same tool, meant a lot, I think. The other thing I just wanted to ask is, how did you select who would be participating in the PLC professional development? Is the reason that Westford or Junction schools aren't participating in that because they've got it down?
For the PLC, the culture one that we're going to, that one?
Atlanta.
In Atlanta,
Yeah.
that was choice.
Okay.
So I did put it out to the central office administrators, thinking this would be a good one. And then principals want to also join in whatever. So a lot of EJ principals are still taking teams of teachers. Same with the former town too. We're trying to get as many people involved and trained as teacher leaders. So if there's still some in a building that have a teacher leader that needs to be trained, that'll happen this year. The high school will end up attending national conferences. Dennis ended up attending this one. He's overseeing the PLC work, so he thought this would be a good one for him to go to. Others administrators will go to this is a little different than the Institute when you learn about what PLCs are. This is about how to keep them going. So I think Wendy and Peter are thinking, well, they've had them, let's go and see how do we keep it going and supporting.
Previously gone with teacher leaders to be trained through the Institute.
Yeah.
CTE has gone.
Like the advanced level.
But this is kind of like, how does the entire system continue to nurture and expand and build, enthusiasm towards this?
Yeah.
Well,
Right.
it moves to that real central basis of people feeling efficacy.
And so the hope is that everyone comes back from that conference and is able to share that with all the district leadership.
Absolutely, yes. We will be sharing. And just as they do when they go to an institute and come
Yeah.
back and learn something. I mean, our leadership team meetings are always about that learning and sharing. And I would think that this team that goes away to come back, it'll be a different kind of sharing than it has been, because it's really about that culture. And that's almost our next step. So how do you keep this going? How do you keep it sustainable? How do you build? When you do an initiative, we don't have everybody on board. How do you get them on board? And what is the culture? And what's the community culture around that also?
Thank you, that's helpful.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments on this report? Kim?
Just on that one, and I think it may not be the focus of what this work would be, but we've spoken about ways to sort of evaluate the value added of the SELs or the PLCs or any of the other tools. So is there a point at which these workshops touch on that so that there's a way to connect it directly with student outcomes or things that are helpful?
So the workshop you mean the two things that I mentioned, the PLCs or the Instructional Leadership Academy? So the Instructional Leadership Academy does have, one of the standards is around social and emotional learning. And Dylan is doing the training with us in that. So he will take the academy with that hat and lens and think about what does he look for in classrooms with social and emotional learning, and be able to share that with coaches. And also, the principals, a lot of them will be there in the academy. So there does have that lens, but it's not specific.
So I wasn't actually, that was an example of one of the areas where we said, let's hear about how this is impacting. But I think when we instituted the shortened Tuesdays and the time for PLCs, there was also that opportunity to report back to the community and otherwise the connection with improvements in student outcomes or narrowing the gap or whatever else it might be, the intent of that work together to improve instruction for all students. And so I just didn't know if there's an evaluative tool that happens through any of these workshops, or we understand it to be best practice, but how do we connect that and tell that story?
Yeah, the social and emotional learning, I think, is something that we have to keep bringing back to you. If I understand you correctly, but Instructional Leadership Academy, there actually is an assessment. I was over there trying to do my assessment before I get timed out. So we will have, as administrators taking that, a baseline, and then how much we gain in growth through that. That's only on walkthroughs. So is that what you mean? Like, what's the assessment of that?
The value added of the PLC
Oh, for
time.
PLCs.
Yes,
maybe-
I'm sorry, I used it just as an example because that was a recent one that we
Yeah.
said we'd
Yeah.
get reporting back on.
Yeah.
But I think when we asked for the shortened day
Yep.
or explained that
So,
to our
yeah.
community, it was tied to the opportunity to improve instruction through shared expertise.
It is all tied together under the larger umbrella of improving instruction for students, for improving teaching and learning. It is all tied together. The PLC's work this year is focused on outcomes of essential standards. And Jackie will be coming to present that, aligning the work. We have also been looking at data around, so as we look at data as an instructional team and their PLCs are creating essential standards, we'll make sure that they're aligning with what our data says we need to work on. That alignment will come to you. You will see the essential standards. You'll be able to, that throughout the year where we will be bringing that work. Our K-8, because they're on a different track right now than the high school, K-8 is working on essential standards. First, we had the proficiencies before, as the two districts were, SU and district was merging, they were creating proficiencies. Those now, the next step is essential standards. As a new district, we didn't get right into that work. We created the PLCs, created the relationships, created the accountability that they know they're there and this is what they'll be doing. Now this year is the hard work of essential standards and aligning curriculum. There's a lot of work that goes into it, so it's not going to happen overnight. But that essential standards will actually drive what our report cards look like. So we'll have a change in report cards, our progress reports, and that'll change what happens in the classroom. So first we have the essential standards they'll be working on. So what are those outcomes? Not the outcomes from the CIP. Can be, some of it. They'll be working on essential standards. What does that look like in the classroom for learning targets? What do the report cards look like? What are those measurable outcomes? And how does that affect our state and local assessments? All aligned, which Jackie does plan on coming to talk to you about essential standards. We are all now K-8. We're doing the exact, I'm leading a grade 3 one, co-leading with a teacher, grade 3 PLC. And part of it is for me to see what's happening and get right in there. And we are all doing the same reading, we did the same agenda, we had the same outcomes for the day to keep that consistency so that we build on to those essential standards. We do have pushback. There are teachers, K-8, saying, nope, we don't need this, but we read an article with the leadership team around coherence and how important that is for student achievement. And then we read it with our PLCs, so now many people, even in the high school,
I was gonna
have
say
read
that
that article. Article is amazing.
Our first pieces of evidence will be alignment and cohesiveness and continuity. Those will be the first pieces of evidence because they just didn't, it just was, there was no existence of those prior. And then once we have that, the PLCs are continue to move and entrench and really kind of root in that efficacy. And then we have our data teams working in PLCs, we'll be able to, we'll be able to really make that happen. I mean, if we don't have better student achievement in GAP, then we're bucking all the empirical research around PLCs, which would mean that we have, an implementation flaw. So that would, this is the best research and the strongest research to how any school that has moved the needle on closing the gap and greater student achievement has done it through this mechanism. And we can't do it in pieces and pockets of it. It has to be an entire culture that embraces it. And so those are some of the evidence points you'll see of value add to the Tuesday, but also there's a lot more that happens than that one period of time.
And I didn't mean for you guys to do a report now. I was just wondering if any part of the training or the work that would be happening at these conferences touches on that piece, because accountability is important always, and I think it helps reinforce the empirical evidence around it when anybody can see there to be movement in its importance. And so just was wondering, because I imagine that's harder to evaluate.
Yes.
Just a couple of thoughts. I think Kim's on the right track. To we need the alignment across every grade, across every school, and the performance across all of those organizations needs to be a level playing field, and we need to know where the dips are and where work needs to be done. That is real key. And I see part of that in, there are a number of initiatives at different grades, and that's the part that I don't have a handle on. So maybe we ought to just start with training. How many teachers are trained at each particular grade level? And there'll be experts and meets requirements,
Trained as in for,
PLC training, learning to become SEL training, equity training, wherever it is. Because that's what I see is bringing this initiative across the organization.
yeah.
And how are we doing, how much work we have to do, and that's important feedback for the board.
PLCs are a structure for professional development, so
Right.
as we train the
Right.
leaders, they deliver and facilitate the learning in
But is there a
PLC.
certification
Yeah.
associated with that? No. So,
No, there is an who went. They'll get a certificate if they went.
okay,
but-
well, that's an
Yep.
indicator.
Yep, yep, we can have numbers of how many people have been.
A total N of these, this is the number of teacher leaders.
Yeah.
And this is the number that have gone through training, this is the number that are booked, and this is the number that's
It's the number
remaining.
that's getting a
See
stipend.
that
And- Yep,
progression through the organization
yep.
Yep.
over time, and that's a good indicator. And that training will change on the next level of competencies that need to
Correct.
be mastered.
Correct.
You used a term there that Pedro Navarro, who's kind of an equity expert, he's from California, he's just actually on NPR the other day. We saw him last summer down, and he said that one of the very first steps in equity is leveling the playing ground. It's not the end, that's not where you stop.
Right.
But you've got to level that playing ground. So this idea of alignment of curriculum, establishing essential standards, all the way through, it really is, it is the core work to propel us forward.
Right.
That level the playing ground, while it's broad, it has a sweet spot within our instruction, and that's sort of almost the myopic focus right now, is that we're going to change student performance through instruction, and it's going to be that relationship with that classroom teacher to that student.
And then through the Instructional Leadership Academy and the feedback that they give the teachers on those essential standards and the instruction behind them and the teaching and learning. It's all
I think,
focused on the same thing.
I think the only suggestion would be a formalized accreditation of the skills. You know, accreditation
Yep.
and recognition of skill.
Yeah, you should cycle through too. You should not always be a PLC leader and then keep moving up. You actually take someone in your PLC and have them become a leader, and it cycles through. The good cycle that PLC experts say is a 3-year cycle. So you're always having, somebody training as a PLC leader, and because training is really important.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, any other
Accountability
questions? I think this is on. Any other questions on this report? Okay, we'll move on to best goals.
So I did print them out because I put a chart that, after meeting with
Yeah, this gremlin was here about 3
Earlier.
hours ago and appears to have come back.
I just shut it off.
Not
that.
This says my battery is low.
Oh, yeah,
This
something's
is,
going on with
this
that.
isn't,
That's an amplifier.
this is not working.
Okay. Well, maybe you can use theirs.
He doesn't need
They have another one.
That's true.
Stay there. So as I was creating the goals, I really was thinking about, these are more like 2-year goals instead of 1-year goal, which makes sense. Thinking about being the 3rd year in superintendency, it matches the contract. 2 years seems better. It can get, even though I will refine and adjust the goals at the end of the year. It's not like these are stagnant by all means. I really used this year the feedback from the supervision and evaluation. So at the top, after I shared my goals with Brian, a colleague, and he thought it would be clearer if at the top that I just, not to stay here, I will take it out, but that it's clear for you to see the standard focus and then that move in the rubric on how to become highly effective. So I related that to that and took your feedback in all of the goals and created the goals around that and around what's needed as a superintendent. So I took the 5 areas and really focused in on what I feel like after going into the 3rd year, what I know needs to happen in the system, and also taking your feedback. Does that make sense, how they're connected to each of the areas? So the goal 1, to have a significant impact on closing the achievement gap by creating and sharing a monitoring system that is aligned with the district's vision, continuous improvements plan, the measurable outcomes in student learning. So that it's important to be able to build a belief system that teachers are believing in themselves and they're believing in the factor that they have the power to change student achievement. That's what collective teacher efficacy is all about. It's what PLCs do also. I think it's really important that as a superintendent, I have that in the goal so that we know that that's what we're focused on, that's what I'm focused on. And then whereas the principal piece is that same kind of thing, is setting up that culture where teachers find success. And so when I'm meeting with them one-on-one, that's what we're talking about in helping teachers to find the success. And through our new professional model, it's all tied in. And then for my role with them is just to make sure that within the systems that all educators find success in what they're doing and are able to be accountable to that and lead. It's all about students. Everything we do is about kids and learning. And I think that that helps define each role in that student achievement. So to create the monitoring, a system for monitoring student learning and really find the benchmarks in a reporting calendar. So when I was listening to Patrick and Diane, I was thinking, oh, my goal is about doing that. And I could bring a draft of, because I already have Jackie, Aaron, Dylan, and I working on this. So we could bring that draft to you all and see if that meets yours or which ones you'd like us to highlight, because ours might be a little deeper and bigger than all the data that you would need. But you could highlight which pieces you want. And then really to explore some data sets that we haven't currently used to look at student improvement and system improvement. So we know they're out there. And then utilize the student data to inform and plan. So we continually have to look at our continuous improvement plan and use data to inform that. So that's that piece of it. And then the goal 2 is to ensure positive internal and external relationships by establishing effective collaboration through informing, inquiring, involving, and inspiring the EWSD communities. So I took it a step further than making sure that written communication was getting out there. That's what my goal was last year about, and getting into the Essex Reporter and getting into a pretty regular basis with a staff newsletter and a parent newsletter and getting out there. This one is more about developing those relationships and having focused community or conversations and focused teacher conversations as we go through this professional growth model. I will be scheduling time at each school to have teachers come and talk and really lead some focused conversations around that model. So I can gather feedback, or we can gather feedback and adjust. So it's more about, it's not just putting information out there, but it's gathering information and asking the right questions to then communicate and improve. The goal 3 is to contribute to the success of the new EWSD board governance model by supporting their learning needs and developing structures that contribute to the success of governing EWSD. So really, that's about helping and supporting you and what's needed in that. And it's where I also tied in the policies. Of course, policies will be part of that and monitoring those. And I did add procedures, even though that's not in the original standard one. But I know some of you had questions about that and where they are. And so that's in there also. And the data comes into there too. So as you monitor student outcomes, I did put providing the data to you that you need to do that. And then goal 4 is effectively implement the newly created supervision and evaluation models for both principals and teachers that are aligned to the EWSD vision. And that's involving both staff and principals in that, implementing that one-on-one time plus the 90 minutes extra, not extra, but my school visits of that, and really defining clear and detailed expectations of what's expected of the principals as instructional leaders and what does that look like, and even the difference in how that's changed over the years, which I think is important for them. We've started that work, but we need to finish and really talk about that. And then providing resources for the principals to focus on their own improvement of learning and teaching, and then the school's improvement of learning and teaching. And then goal 5 is making sure that the resources, as they're aligned to the vision, and evaluate the implementation of cost-related initiatives through the improvement of the growth of the system, and how it relates to in both student achievement, academically and social and emotional. So as we look at data and how it's related to initiatives that were costly, such as social and emotional learning coaches, for me to be able to bring data to you to share with you, and that it's kind of what Kim was talking about too, right? The implementation and what's the impact on student learning. And that's my responsibility and a goal of mine to bring that to you, and also to bring to the leadership team to monitor that. And that's why it's 2 years, those goals. Do you have questions about the goals?
Questions, comments? Patrick.
Yeah, actually, Beth, I really appreciate it. I like these because I think that at the end of the year, as we're going through and doing your evaluation, that the way that these goals are set up with the specific bullet points, it's going to give, at least certainly speaking for myself, is going to give me like a really good way to go back and think of explicit examples that you may have accomplished over the last year, whereas not that your other goals weren't clear, but this is just such a very helpful way to set it up that I'm really appreciative of it.
Good, thank you. Well, I tried to align to what you were evaluating me on instead of having these other goals, which I couldn't have done before anyways, because that was being created and I was trying to implement those goals and get a district off the ground. Now I feel like we can do this.
Okay. Other comments?
Thank you.
No.
Is it on?
Nope.
We have all the RETN on, and we potted that down because that was what was causing the interference.
Okay. Well, this has a low battery, so this isn't working.
Oh, that might be the
Maybe
Culprit.
that's the culprit. Okay. So, task team updates, you haven't met yet, correct? Okay.
Brian, could you call up the task team? So I wanted to just quickly go over our charge. So the
Good.
governance task team, one of our major milestones was met at the board retreat when we had that awesome, in my opinion, awesome panel discussion with superintendents and board members from other districts that Beth helped organize. So I just wanted to sort of refresh everyone's memory about what the goals of the task team are and what our next phase of work is going to be. So if you look, the way that we sort of see our work at this point is that we've gotten down to probably 4 or 5 in terms of the tasks, and we're looking right now at the September-October timeframe. We feel like we're pretty much on target. We've done the research. Keely did an excellent presentation on the different kinds of models that we've sort of investigated. Each member of the task team watched hours of video of other districts and how they conducted meetings and that kind of thing. We've looked at monitoring reports, and we've looked at samples of policy governance boards and some of the work that they've done. So anyway, we're now at the point where the next phase of our work is going to involve developing a recommendation. And so this isn't our last conversation, but we're going to start shaping a recommendation at our next series of meetings. And unfortunately, because it's such a busy group of people, we weren't able to meet prior to this meeting. And so our next meeting, which only some of us can attend, is on Thursday, where we'll begin to sort of debrief the panel discussion, talk about any information that we still sort of feel like we need to fill in any gaps, and to begin talking about what does a recommendation look like. And so my next piece of work is to get a few more dates on the calendar now, so that we have 2 or 3 meetings established where we can really focus on that next phase of work. So I just wanted to give the board an idea that we feel like we're on track with our tasks, we feel like we're on track with the timeline, and we'll be ready to deliver a recommendation in October.
Okay, great,
The only
thank
thing
you.
I'll add is that that meeting was warned from 6 to 8, and it definitely will be 6 to 7:30, just in case anybody's wondering. Or somebody else can, I will have to leave at 7:30,
Yes.
and so we moved it back, so I think it just, the back end time didn't move. I just wanted to let our group know, or
Okay,
whatever
great.
we haven't finished, you guys can keep going.
Thanks. It's a busy week, that's for sure. Liz?
No update. We skipped our meeting last time because we had the retreat and the board meeting in the same week. So
Right.
we are going to be meeting, the Voices group is meeting on Monday. So we'll have an update for October 1st on that. And our team is meeting next Thursday morning. So that's it.
State and local updates. I think the big thing there is that both the regional meeting for the SBA is coming up. I think our region is on October 23rd in Winooski. You can sign up online now if you're interested in going. And they just bill the school district, so you don't, if there's even a fee, I can't remember. But then the statewide conference is November 6th and 7th. It's at Lake Maury. I think Lorna is ready to start taking information about who wants to go. You can go for 1 day or 2 days. Need to let her know.
Can I speak to that for a minute?
Yeah.
So there is a form on the board intranet. If you look at, there's a bar right across it that says VSBA fall blah, 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 form. So when you click on it, it asks you what nights you want to stay, or if you're commuting day to day, what you want for dinner, whether you're going to stay for the awards. There's 7 questions to fill out, and then Lorna will take that information and make the reservations for everybody. So you don't have to do any of that. And then we'll be able to, I will bring a check to Lake Maury, so you don't have to worry about trying to get reimbursed or anything. If you do it by the time, I think we said October 15th. If you do it after that, you're on your own. You'll have to do reimbursement.
Is until November 7th.
Okay.
So
So you get a cheaper rate.
it's a cheaper rate
Yeah.
by $50. So
Okay.
I think the hotel is different, but the registration for the conference is early registration until the 7th, Monday, the 7th.
Okay, we're upping the,
That'd be great.
fill it out before.
Yeah, please.
October 7th.
Move it quicker. We're
Try
going
to
for the
fit
50
it done
bucks.
by.
Yeah.
Any of the students too, to figure out how they could
Yeah.
go. That would be great if,
It's probably hard, but yeah.
yeah.
Anything on Friday, yeah. That Friday, if they only wanted to go one day, Friday would be a good day.
Yeah.
Anything else, Kim?
You know, the Special Ed Act 173 work is still happening. I was on Monday, went and observed the advisory committee's work, which will result in, it sounds like, unfortunately, potentially 2 drafts going to the State Board of Ed unless the agency and this advisory group can work together in a consensus single draft. But that is not seeming the case right now, so there'll be a presentation to the State Board of Ed at the October meeting of this advisory group and their draft. So I got to see where they were, and largely looking to align definition of special ed services with the federal regulations, which are far more permissive, which would be better aligned with the intent of 173, which is to allow for broader use of the block grant to support all services, less tied to an individual student. And there'll continue to be, I think, work to be done and challenges around documentation of time and maintenance of effort. And so those are big lifts. That group's still working. And honestly, in the hat that I was sitting in that observation for the day of their meeting, I was appreciative for them taking a stab at another draft that incorporates the guidance from, they got an outside opinion, legal opinion on definition of special ed and Vermont's interpretation. And so if that's the way it has to be, that is fine. There's still time before the rules process will begin. But it's such a major impact in how we deliver special ed. It's going to be impacted by the weighting study, which is, to come. That's report is to come as well. There's a lot of to comes that are really challenging, I think, for all of this. So part of this just needs to be done.
Agree.
So they can move on with
So we
other
can
parts. So that
figure out.
it's more detail maybe than you guys need at this point, but it's ongoing.
So in this month's edition of the boardroom from VSBA, Nicole Mays has a really good article about what's going on with Act 173. Kim's just talked about a lot of it, but I think it's worth your time to read that article. Okay. Let's.
The only thing, I'll put a plug for the conference. There's the keynote speaker is someone who's going to be, talking about vision, but also the portrait of the graduate and how you might think about what you want your students to know and be able to do. I think Beth's mentioned her name before, so is probably familiar with that work. And the professor at UVM who's been overseeing and the author of the weighting study is also speaking. That's going to have major impact. We get our student count, that's not the right word, terminology.
Well,
it's
equalized
people is impacted by the weighting, and it might be a rural weighting, which is not currently incorporated. Urban, there are pieces that are not well reflected in terms of the cost to educate different subsets of the population. And to calculate your equalized pupil, that needs to be right. So that this has been long coming. I think a few years. I mean, since
Hasn't
Rebecca was
changed
there, actually, it's been
much since.
I think actually since I sat in any of these meetings, I remember people, maybe from other parts, I think it is impactful for us, maybe more so now than when I remember hearing about this the very first time I sat in a VSBA board meeting, I don't know how many years ago. And I couldn't really fully appreciate, I don't think, the impact in schools like Burlington or in the Northeast Kingdom, the way getting this wrong impacts what they can do for students.
Yeah.
So, anyway. So I
Okay.
think the conference will have good meat this time, folks. Not that it doesn't always, but like the keynotes, I'm pretty excited about what they'll be able to bring to the
The
work.
portrait of a graduate work is the work that you could use to engage the community on measurable outcomes for
Measure
students. So
outcomes.
that those ends,
Ends,
that ends
yeah.
like report would come from, that's the process that I would want to use with it. It's very engaging. So that'll be great to have the speaker.
Good. Patrick, anything from the local level?
No, I mean, it's guns and merger,
Is that all?
yeah.
What else you-
Nothing interesting.
Unless you're,
We actually aren't talking to dogs, it's the public that's talking to dogs, really.
yeah. So until you're talking about voting dates, we'll,
Yeah,
yeah,
for now.
okay. So I sent you today the meeting evaluation questions that we've been using and the meeting evaluations questions that Champlain Valley uses. I think next time when we're talking about our goals, we'll talk about that as well. So that will be part of our October 1st meeting. Okay, so we're going to go around the room and talk about what you valued about the meeting, appreciated about the meeting, or were challenged by one thing under one of those categories. Keely.
I appreciated the format of the finance report.
Okay.
Yeah.
I appreciated receiving Beth's goals and the clear way in which they were presented.
I did as well, and I already had the suggestions. But it's actually very clear and it's appreciated. Yeah, it's good.
I appreciated the financial report, so I was excited to see pluses versus minuses.
Yeah, I was going to say, I appreciated Beth's goals and particularly the format.
I appreciated your engagement in the goal writing again during the meeting, even though it's not great for the camera to be watching all of that, but your engagement in doing that during a meeting, I think, was important and valued.
Yeah, I valued just kind of trying something different and doing teamwork during a meeting. So I really valued the board kind of having the gumption to try something different.
Yeah, I think our value our teamwork during that. Most of our goal work is we're talking about it and putting it up on the screen. There's not a lot of tear down. In fact, there's like no tear down of other people's ideas on this board, which is great. Right, I had this, right, I mean, just compared to, to nothing going on right now.
Sorry to be a broken record, but I appreciate the meeting design. I really liked the reports, the way they were delivered, the clarity and the time, the small group work and changing that up. So we had a working session as part of the meeting was really, I really appreciated that meeting design.
Yes.
Todd?
I don't have anything.
Okay. All right, so, anybody have something for the agenda for October 1st that we might not think of?
I guess we probably should just have a placeholder in case the result of the task team conversation would involve some kind of board conversation about a specific thing.
Okay.
So it could be that we just go with a regular update, but we may want to think about whether or not we need dedicated time.
Okay. And Kim should know that when we do our agenda planning on Friday.
Maybe, Brenda, do
Okay.
you feel it's fair, the date of the next meeting is literally the 1st of October?
Yeah.
Would it be better to think of one that's the 15th of October? I mean, the 1st of October is barely October yet.
Yeah, but they meet the Thursday.
We meet this Thursday, and we may meet next week too.
Okay.
So
Can you-
I think it's
they'll
just
be-
a placeholder, we, like
Yep.
I said, we may just decide we don't need it, but I think if Kim can just communicate to Martha based on the discussion.
You did have one.
Oh.
It may,
Oh.
may not be an action plan even on the first, but I would
No.
imagine before we get.
Some-
Discussion.
We'll want to figure out from the recommendation, what are the additional questions the board might have that needs further response before we can take action. So that's what I'm thinking.
Right.
Yeah, there's gonna
Yep.
be at least one more sort of sounding board session.
Okay, great. And board messages to the community. I think it's the financial reports, and ratifying the support staff agreement. And maybe there's some pieces from the superintendent's report that you would want to highlight. Maybe not. Anything else? Okay, well, thank you all, and we are adjourned.